Hey guys, it's Jess from Misfortune Astrology. How's everybody doing? Back from the jewelry studio during nap time to work on part 2 of this video series of what the fuck is up with the world. Today I'm going to be talking to you guys about the Great Mutation. So video number 1 was about the Great Conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn, which, as I explained at length, is a 20-year cycle that comes around every couple decades to cause basically a cosmic reset between the principles of expansion and contraction, which are represented by Jupiter and Saturn respectively. This is, again, it's an every 20-year nice kind of clean cycle, but as with most of astrology, there are many layers to all of this stuff, and so that was kind of layer number 1. In addition to us closing out a 20-year cycle that started in when the two met up in Taurus in the year 2000, we are also closing out an approximately 200-year cycle with this particular conjunction. Now, the way that this works, and I'm going to do my best to explain it because I definitely understand it, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to verbalize it in a way that makes sense. Essentially what happens is that these conjunctions, like I said, they occur every 20 years. And for long stretches of time, centuries, a little bit more than a century in each case, the conjunctions all occur within the signs of the same element. So since the early 1800s, almost every single one of these conjunctions has occurred in one of the earth signs, which are Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. So this happens over and over and over again. We see this. And then after approximately 200 years, what happens is there's the introduction to a new element. So in this case, what's currently happening right now is that the mutation is happening from the earth signs over to the air signs. So the way that this all worked, I have the dates written down, so I may have to refer to them. But basically what happened was prior to 1802, I believe it was. Yeah, 1802. In 1802, the earth element was actually introduced. Prior to 1802, for 200 years before that, all of these conjunctions were happening in the fire signs. In 1802, the earth element is introduced and the conjunction occurs in Virgo. However, what happens is there's a period of time where there's a crossover between the two elements that are switching over to each other. So all going on in the fire signs, 1802, we have one that occurs in Virgo, and then the next one happens in 1821, and that one actually goes back to Aries, which is the cardinal fire sign, right? So we have that kind of crossover period. But then since 1842, which was the next one, they've been in the earth signs, right? So either Taurus, Virgo, or Capricorn consistently. So from 1842 all the way up to 1981, which is, not quite 200 years, but 160-ish years. 140-ish years. I don't know. Sorry, math's not a strong suit. But a long period of time. They've all been in the earth signs. Then in 1981, there's one in Libra. So that's the beginning of this crossover period that I've been talking about. That's the beginning of the mutation from earth to air. So the one occurs in Libra in 1981, and then in 2000 we get the next one, which is in Taurus, and that's the last one of the earth element. The Great Conjunction that's coming up this year on December 21st, 2020 is happening at the 0 degree of Aquarius, one of the other air signs, right? So the earth signs are Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn. The air signs are Gemini, Libra, Aquarius. So it's important to kind of know those. So now basically, in earnest, the Great Mutation starts in the air signs, and it's going to continue for a really long time. I have these dates written down too. So the next element coming up will be water, but none of us are going to live to see that. Water will take over, let's see, it's December of 2159. There will be a Great Conjunction in Scorpio. Then in 2179, 20 years later, it'll happen in Gemini. 2199, there'll be one in Aquarius, so that's going to be a little bit longer of a crossover. And then into water for good after that, 2199. They'll move into water for good, and they'll be in the water signs until the year 2378. So as you can see, these are, very long cycles. These mutations do not happen very often, and as such, they are really, really important things to take note of. Now, the 20-year cycle that goes on with Jupiter Saturn is also pretty important, but every 20 years, in astrological terms, is relatively frequent. Maybe not so much in the course of a human life, but in the course of the universe, 20 years is a drop in the bucket. 200 years, not so much, right? So nobody alive today has experienced one of these mutations, and nobody that's alive today will experience one ever again, right? None of us are going to be around for the Great Mutation into water. So definitely something to take note of. Now, the reason that I'm flagging this is because I think that a lot of what we're seeing in the world right now is a direct result of this mutation from the earth signs over to the air signs. Now, forgive me if I'm getting overly basic, but I think that it's important to kind of break this down to its, the most bite-sized pieces possible, because I think it helps to understand. In astrology, the earth element is about the material plane. It's about mundane, day-to-day physical existence, things that we can touch, things that we can actually physically manifest. That's the earth element. The people who have very heavy earth presences in their chart are the builders and the planners among us. We rely on these people pretty heavily. Now, air, on the other hand, is not at all compatible with earth. Earth being a feminine element, a yin element, right? Air, on the other hand, is a masculine kind of yang, outward-facing energy. Air is all about intellect and intelligence communication, right? So we're moving into a completely new realm from earth to air, and it's a very, very dramatic shift, and we are very much experiencing it. Now, what did these great conjunctions look like while they were traveling through the earth signs? I've already noted in the last video the trend of presidents dying, right? So again, it's the material world, the material body, the physical plane. I think that has a lot to do with why we were seeing some of these deaths. Those are just kind of the most notable ones. I'm sure that there are more, but like presidents are something that have been very visible even through the 1800s. And so that's probably why astrologers would pick up on something like that. I have no doubt that there would be more trends that would go along with this, but they weren't necessarily visible. That's not going to be the case with air, because now everything's visible. And so, astrologers 200 years from now, when it changes over to water, will have a field day figuring all of this out. But, basically, as the, and I wanted to say too, just like I should have actually shown this before. So this is a picture of what happens. We call these Trigons, right? So this is actually, I didn't write down the name of the astrologer who did this, but this was like right off Wikipedia. This is a mapping of all of the great conjunctions that occurred while they were occurring in the fire signs, in the fire element. So they span from like 1587, I think, through the late 1700s into that crossover period that I talked about, where there was one in Virgo, then it moved back to Aries, and then it was in earth signs for good. So that's essentially what's going to happen now. It happened through the earth signs, same things. It just kind of bounces around in an equilateral triangle, forming what's called Trigons. So anyway, when these conjunctions were going through the earth signs, what did we see? Well, we saw the rise of the Industrial Revolution, right? We saw human beings becoming dependent on the material world, on material resources, becoming wholly dependent on them. And at first, I think that this was probably a great innovation. But, again, it's the whole idea of the cosmic reset. Saturn comes in, he kind of reins everything back. And so when the conjunctions initially started in the earth element, there was structure around what people were doing. But that structure got lost pretty quickly. And so now what do we see 200 years later? We see human beings completely dependent upon material resources that are finite, that we did not anticipate would be finite, which is absolutely ridiculous when you think of it, right? Humans not having that type of foresight, or even worse, potentially having that foresight and disregarding it completely, as if we were going to be able to just borrow from Mother Earth indefinitely, and she was never going to give any pushback, right? So we're seeing this now. And if you look at the earth signs and you kind of look at what they're about now, this is a very overly simplistic idea of what the earth signs are about, but in Taurus, Taurus energy is about gathering the resources that are necessary for survival, right? In Virgo, we then, we take those resources, we organize them, we analyze them, okay? And then we move to Capricorn, which is the final and most evolved of the earth signs. Capricorn is very leadership oriented. That's where we go to take all those resources and use them to build structures, government systems. We build things up around us that are meant to protect us and to keep us safe. Now, whether they ultimately do that is another question, but that is the goal in Capricorn, right? The ambition in Capricorn is to create structures that will give our lives form, right? Give us predictability in the material realm, because otherwise it would be kind of scary here, right? So you see throughout the 1800s, 1900s, this increasing dependent on material resources, oil, agriculture, the rise and fall of governments, right? This is all, stuff that's been built up. And over time, same idea, right, that I talked about in the first video with, as these cycles are kind of, they come into existence. And for the first half of the cycle, there's a lot of momentum, right? Then you get to kind of the midpoint of the cycle, and that's the peak, right? It's very similar to the moon, okay? So like we have a new moon coming up tomorrow in Taurus. How fitting. What's going to happen is over the course of the next 6 months, there'll be great energy for manifestation in the area that's ruled by Taurus in your chart. But in 6 months, when we come to the full moon that's in Taurus while the sun is in Scorpio, that's going to kind of signal a peak moment, okay? And then for the next 6 months until next year's new moon in Taurus, that energy will wane. So, manifestation becomes much more difficult to the point where, the ability to manifest completely breaks down. Same idea with every single astrological cycle, okay? So when we first moved into the Earth mutation in early 1800s, there was tons and tons of energy for this type of progress. Now, at the end of it, there's none, right? There's nothing left. Okay. So we are now seeing, what's going on here. Everything is crumbling, right? All of these systems that we've built up in the earth element are failing us, right? I mean, there's genuinely no other way to kind of say it. And that's not to say that the earth is failing us. The earth would never fail us. It's our relationship to the earth that has to change. That is what this mutation is all about. Now, we got a really decent idea of what this crossover was going to look like when you start to basically look at that first great conjunction in the air sign of Libra in 1981, and then the next one in Taurus in 2000, and now we're moving into the final one, or not the final one, the final push into the air signs at the end of this year when we start in Aquarius. The last 40 years since 1981, I would venture to say, there's been more progress, human progress, in those 40 years than possibly ever, right? Than possibly ever in human history. I mean, I'm not sure how one would measure that, but I think that, the crossover from earth to air is quite dramatic. In that 20-year frame between 1981 and 2001, the internet was invented, email was invented, cell phones were invented, right? You start to see this movement away from the ground, right? Like we don't use landlines anymore for phones. It's very, very rare, right? People maybe still have them, but it's not something that we rely on. Everybody's using cell phones. We're using waves, through the air. We're not connected to the ground anymore. There aren't any cords, right? Everything became cordless. Also, this kind of move away from in commerce, right? So like this push away from brick and mortar stores to, more online stores. Okay. This is all stuff that we see now when when the Great Conjunction happened in Taurus, there was kind of confusion, I think, because, what ends up happening is there's this push towards the air element, but there's this final kind of push back by the earth element. But the earth element is completely, it's lost its hold by that point. And so, we saw the housing market crumble in that, in the 20-year span between, 2000 and 2020, a couple of pretty serious recessions, a lot of the, this kind of capitalism. Okay. I mean, is there like a bigger, ideology, I can't speak, than capitalism that, that really proves that the earth element had kind of taken over, right? You see it now in these pushes towards socialism, right? Socialism is more of like an air element type of ideology, right, than capitalism. No more of this materialistic, like everything is about how much money, your reputation, like all that stuff. We're really going to see that we're already seeing it crumble, but I think it's going to start to crumble at like a much faster rate. What are we going to see, now that we're moving into the earth signs? Well, like I said, the air signs. We're going to see, the air element take over. Communication already has become paramount. It's going to become even more so. I think that this whole pandemic that we're experiencing right now, to the extent that that is actually what's going on, we're seeing it, right? Like all of the sudden, it's becoming very evident to us that we didn't need to be using so much gas to be getting back and forth to work. A lot of what we do is doable from home if we have the right supports in place, which many of us didn't, because that's not the way our society has been set up. So now there are all these ideas floating around about how can we better support ourselves in this new regime of air, so that we are not depending so much on the Earth's finite resources, so that we're becoming more self-sustained. The air signs are Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. So, just like we did with the earth signs, let's kind of break down what those mean, right? So in Gemini, same like with Taurus. In Taurus, we're gathering material resources. In Gemini, we're gathering information. So it's intangible stuff versus tangible stuff, but still very important, right? The gathering of information is the whole point of Gemini energy in your chart. And it's what we then use to form all of the belief systems that we use to support ourselves for the rest of our lives. In Libra, we take that information and we use it in relating, and we use it to negotiate in a friendly but detached way. And then, once we get to Aquarius, Aquarius is a very, very contradictory sign. It's tough to really explain the sign to most people who don't have heavy Aquarian influences in their chart, right? I'm a very, very late degree Aquarius, and so it resonates very strongly with me. But I can't tell you how many people think I'm a total fucking crackpot, right? Or that I'm flaky, or that I'm this and that. And the problem with Aquarian energy is that it exists in the future. The whole point of it is to kind of stand apart from the collective and to drag the collective forward, because for the most part, the collective doesn't want to move forward. The collective is very happy, with the devil that it knows. And so Aquarians have it really tough in this particular climate. But in Aquarius, we network with an eye towards the future, with an eye towards taking all of that information that we've gained from communicating and interacting with the people around us, really, understanding information from its sources. This is a big problem that we're starting to see with these great mutations and these resets starting to happen in the air signs. Okay, this is going to be one of the biggest problems, is that the boundaryless nature of air is really affecting our ability to, to trust what's going on around us. Okay, so in the earth element, because it's so concerned with the material plane, what you see is what you get. Okay, if something's in front of you and you can physically touch it, you know that it's there, right? And so we as humans, with these great conjunctions going through the earth signs, have really, we've kind of taken for granted that what's in front of us is or is not true, right? So like, for the longest time, it was totally okay to just assume that what you were seeing or what you were reading was the truth, because why on earth would anybody try to fool you? Okay, now that we're moving into the air element, information is suspect, right? I mean, we have the internet now. Like anybody can print anything on the internet, like absolutely anybody can. And just because it's printed doesn't mean it's true. Now try explaining that to people who have been alive for 60, 70, 80 years, even longer, where the earth element has dominated these great conjunctions for so long, and all of these resets have been on the physical material plane. Like these people have been conditioned to trust the world around them. But the air element is making it very clear to us that we cannot do that, right? Like you can trust people, right? Trust your intuition, trust sources, and trust yourself, right? Like that's kind of one of the biggest things about Aquarian energy, is that we Aquarians recognize that all of this categorization that we do of human beings is complete and utter bullshit, okay? Humans are finally waking up to the fact that, that they can view themselves as a collective the way that Aquarius energy has always viewed them. And that is such a beautiful thing to see, because the fact of the matter is that we, the collective, outnumber those who would who would seek to keep us disinformed or uninformed, right? Like, we outnumber them by hundreds to one. So there's absolutely no reason for us to be suppressed in any way, right? You can't suppress air. Air wants to move, air wants to travel. Like, you're not going to stop that from happening. So the push is here. Like, moving into the air element, there's no question that we're going to get there. It really is just kind of a question of how is the fight going to go down? How long are we as a collective going to allow the powers that be to divide and conquer us? Because that is essentially what we're seeing now, right? These divisions, these categorizations, they made a lot more sense when these great conjunctions were going on in the earth element, because when you're in the physical plane, it's very easy to categorize things because you can see them, they're physically in front of you. But in the earth element, there's absolutely no point in doing that anymore. Absolutely no point, right? Black, white, male, male, female is, whatever. I'm not going to get into that one, but religion, all of the things that they use to basically make us all seem like we're different. It's just complete and utter bullshit. And I think that more and more people are starting to wake up to that fact. I certainly hope that that's the case. I think that it bodes very, very well for humanity that the first of these great conjunctions, that really kicks off air is not only in Aquarius, but in the 0 degree of Aquarius. Now, 0 and 29 degrees are the two most powerful degrees in every single sign. And, in the 0 degree, that strength comes from purity, right? It's the first time that a planet has moved into a new sign, and it's like a kid in a candy store, right? It has the whole world in front of it. Nothing is tainting it. There's nothing but purity there. And so the fact that this great conjunction is happening, in that 0 degree, it bodes so very well for the collective, because it really does mean that come the end of this year, we are getting a blank slate. It's like, we're getting an actual blank check to kind of write for ourselves and figure out how are we going to move forward. How are we going to move forward in a networked way, in a way that we are no longer completely reliant on the earth, so that we can heal, right? So that we can heal, so that the earth can heal, so that the resources that should absolutely sustain and support life on this planet are actually given a fair shot to do so, right? Because that's becoming one of the issues with the earth sign winding down. Let me make sure that I got everything. I think I did. And I actually talked about the trend with the presidents and everything in the last video, so I won't repeat that, but I do think, it's worthy of noting, because, the unfortunate reality is that with a lot of these cycles, the end of cycles really does tend to, deaths kind of come with it. And it's like a very unfortunate reality, but, and we're going to see that. And my next video is going to focus more on the Pluto aspects that are going on right now, because those are strong. And he's actually stationing to retrograde. I think he goes retrograde on Saturday. So Pluto stations are notoriously high death periods of time. So do not be surprised if over the course of the next few weeks, if you start hearing about a lot more deaths than, even than we've become accustomed to. We have, again, as this mutation has kind of taken over, I'm struck now by the fact that I had noted a trend before years ago that during Pluto stations, celebrity deaths increased like exponentially. I mean, Tom Petty died during one. Prince died during one. I think today is actually the anniversary of Prince's death. Pluto stations in April every year to retrograde. He stations in October every year to go direct. And so we see spikes in deaths during those times, right? Pluto rules death. And those are high profile deaths. My guess is that lots of people all over the world die during these, that particular cosmic reset of Pluto retrograde cycles, but not every death is noteworthy, right? Not every death is going to get blasted out over the airwaves like somebody like Tom Petty or Prince, okay? But now, maybe that's what we're seeing now. Maybe now that's exactly what's happening, is that all these deaths from COVID-19, we're seeing them. And so it's worthy of note that, because they use it to control us and they use it to make us scared. And that's not to say that you shouldn't take precautions. Obviously you should, if you're high risk, or, if there's, or even if you're not and you just want to take precautions, like absolutely do that, right? But, at the end of the day, it's man versus nature. And if nothing else, take away the fact that nature will always win that battle. Great mutation into air. a very big deal, not something that most people live through. And, you know, if you're here right now and watching this, you know, you were meant to see this. You were meant to understand that the cycles that we're going through are big, right? They're big. And when I add the third layer of Pluto, in the next video, you are going to understand just how absolutely important you are, that you chose to incarnate at this particular time of, you know, not only human history, but to the extent I'm speaking to fellow Americans, like American history too. So that's all I got for today, guys. I will sneak down here during another nap time very soon to finish up this series. So thanks for watching.